nothing I can do to let you down. It doesn't take a trophy to make you proud. I'll never be more loved than I am right now.
Going through a storm, but I won't go down. I hear your voice carried in the rhythm of the wind to call me out. You would cross the ocean, so I wouldn't drown. You've never been closer than you are right now.
You are Jireh, you are enough. Jireh, you are enough. And I will be content in every circumstance. Jireh, you are enough. Forever enough, always enough. You're more than enough. Forever enough, always enough. You are more than enough. I don't wanna forget how I feel right now on the mountaintop. I can see it so clear what it's all about. So stay by my side when the sun goes down. Don't wanna forget how I feel right now. You are enough. And Jireh, you are enough. I will be content in every circumstance. Oh, Jireh, you are enough. Say that again. So Jireh, you are enough. And Jireh, you are enough. And I will be content in every circumstance. Oh, Jireh, you are enough. Forever enough, always enough. Forever enough, always enough.
I'm already loved. I'm already chosen. I know who I am. I know what you've spoken. I'm already loved more than I can imagine.
Thank you.
That is enough. I'm already loved. I'm already chosen. I know who I am, and I know what you've spoken. I'm already loved more than I could imagine, and that is enough.
Yes, amen. Thank you, Lord.
And I'm already loved. I'm already chosen. And I know who I am. And I know what you've spoken. I'm already loved more than I could imagine.
Thank you, Lord.
And that is enough.
Yes, amen. Thank you, Lord.
And that is enough.
Thank you,
You
Lord.
are Jireh. You are enough. Jireh. You You unravel me with a melody. You surround me with a song of deliverance from my enemies.
Thank you, Lord.
Till all my fears are gone. I'm no longer a slave to fear.
Thank you, Lord.
I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I'm no longer a slave to fear. Oh, I am a child of God.
Yes, hallelujah.
Thank you, Lord.
Hallelujah.
Bless you, Jesus.
Thank you, Lord.
Thank you, Lord.
Thank you, Jesus. Hallelujah. Thank you, Jesus.
Golden season, angels bow before your throne, and all the elders cast their crowns before the Lamb of God, singing, "You are the You are worthy of it all. For from you are all things, and to you are all things. You deserve the glory.
Yes, hallelujah.
Sing all the saints. And all the saints and angels bow before your throne, and all the elders cast their crowns before the Lamb of God, sing, "You are worthy of it all. You are worthy of it all. For from you are all things, and to you are all things. You deserve the glory." When we sing it again, tell him this morning, "You are worthy of it all." Oh, you're so worthy. You are worthy of it all. For from you are all things, and to you are all things. You deserve the glory. You are worthy of
Hallelujah.
'Cause you learned me of it all. So Lord, you learned me of it all.
Thank you, Jesus.
For from you are all things, and to you are all things. You deserve the glory. We'll sing it one more time.
Hallelujah. Thank you, Jesus.
You learned me of it all.
Yes, Lord.
You learned me of it all. For from you are all things, and to you are all things. You deserve the glory. One little shout of praise this morning. This time.
Hallelujah. Thank you, Jesus.
Thank you, Lord.
Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus.
Thank you.
Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Jesus, 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 Jesus.
Let's go to the Lord in prayer this morning for those who are not able to be here this morning, those who are sick in body, and for our pastor's family. Let's pray. Lord, you're such a wonderful God, Lord. We thank you for allowing us to come today to your house to worship you, God, to praise you, to dig into your word, to learn from you, Lord. I pray for those who could not be here this morning, Lord, those who are sick in body, those who need a healing and a miracle from you, Lord. I pray for our pastor's family, Lord, right now, Lord, in these trying times, Lord, that they seek you, that they trust you, and they know that you are the final answer, Lord. We give you the praise. In your holy, wonderful name we pray.
Thank you, Lord. Hallelujah.
You may be seated this morning. It is a honor to be here this morning. Anytime that I get the opportunity to speak, I really enjoy that. It's something that the Lord has created a passion for me. It doesn't mean I'm perfect at it. It doesn't mean that I'm the best. But it does mean that I get the opportunity. And there's not a lot of things that I'm good at in life. So when the Lord sees fit for me to do something, I will use my abilities. Now, this morning, I'll be speaking on, it kind of goes in conjunction with the message I spoke 2 weeks ago. It is about when God doesn't answer our prayers. But sometimes God, just because he doesn't answer our prayers yet, doesn't mean he's not going to answer them. Sometimes no, not now doesn't equal the same thing. Sometimes God says, you know what, I'm going to answer your prayers, maybe just not right now at the moment. Who feels like they're in this point right now where God has promised you something, but he hasn't quite answered that prayer? That's me right now. Anybody else? Am I the only one that the Lord, he is giving you this clear vision of what he's going to do for you? You know the answer, you know the outcome, but it just hasn't quite happened yet. And that's me right now. I kind of define some of the parts of my life where I'm at. But in many ways, I was just back there in Pastor's office, and I was reading over my notes before I came up on the stage, and I was sitting in the chair at the desk, and I look over to the right, and there's a bulletin board in the Pastor's office, and there's some pictures on there. And I don't know if y'all seen them in there, but there's some pictures. Have you seen them? They're at least, and I was just trying to do some quick math, 12 to 13 years old, if I'm getting precise, as close as I can. And in that picture, I'm sitting right there on the stage, right here. Now, the sanctuary looked a lot different then. There was wood paneling, but I'm sitting right there on the stage, and there's Stephanie, who was not even my wife at the time. She's standing right here. Jessie was right beside her, and Sheena was right there, and a few more. It was like the first couple of weeks of our youth group, and there was about 7, 8 members total. And I look at the church, and it's changed a lot. And we've had the church property at that point, and I feel like for 12, 13 years we've been waiting on what God has promised us. We've been waiting for that church property, and we had such a wonderful time Wednesday night at church property. Who went there Wednesday night? That was such a good time. And I feel like we're waiting sometimes, but waiting doesn't give us an excuse to sit there and do nothing.
Right.
Waiting, we know that the Lord has that building down the road for us. We know that. We may not know the time, but waiting on a promise from the Lord does not give us the excuse to sit there and do nothing.
That's right.
The whole time, and I feel we've been diligent about that, we have continued to have church. There may be times we had wood paneling behind that wallpaper, guys, with some wood paneling. It was not the best looking. Who remembers the wood paneling in here?
Yeah.
And then we had these chandeliers that hang out, old-fashioned chandeliers with the big white
globes on there, and every Wednesday I probably broke one of them with the kids in here, and so over time we ran out of those little globes on them. But the Lord has taken us, and during this time of waiting, what He's doing is not just making you suffer for no sense. He is perfecting you. He is preparing you. He says, you're not ready. 13 years ago, we weren't ready for that church.
Right.
Who knows if we're ready right now, but when He does give us that church, He says, now is the time. Now is the time that is perfect. Now is the time you are ready for it. The same thing with the blessings and the miracles and the promises He has in our life. The reason why sometimes He hasn't given them is not because He enjoys seeing us suffer. It's not because of all these things. He says, my time is different than your time. And this waiting, you're going to wait for a little while, but you're not just going to sit there. You're going to be in perfection. You're going to be preparing yourself. So there's my intro for today's message, if you haven't figured it out. We talk about waiting. Waiting is something that is one of the hardest things for us to do. Before I started today, I did a little poll back there, and I asked 4 guys in the back what was the hardest time or the things they hated waiting on the most. Johnny said traffic. Johnny hates waiting in traffic. So if you see Johnny on the side of the road, just wave and smile nicely to him because he hates waiting in traffic. Dalton said he hates waiting at the racetrack because Dalton likes to race. He likes to race cars. And you know how they're getting everybody positioned and your foot's on the gas and you're ready to hit that gas? And he said that is the hardest time for him to wait because he's ready to go. He's ready to give it some gas. And that's the hard time. You got to be patient. Trey said he hates waiting at a restaurant. That's many of us. We hate, if they got a 5-minute wait, we ain't waiting. We're going somewhere else. And Rock said he hates waiting at the grocery store. Rock said, I said, what part of it, Rock? I said, is it the getting the groceries, waiting in line, parking, and checking out? He said, all of it. He hates all of it. So if you see Rock at a grocery store, just find a different aisle to go down. All right? And we all have those things that we hate. Doctor's offices. Oh, man. They have the main waiting room. Then they call your name and you got like the lottery, like you just won something, even though you're about to go in there and get examined. You're about to do some things you don't want to do, but you get excited because they call you. All to go at this one doctor's office me and Stephanie went to when we were having kids. There's the waiting room, and then there's a second waiting room. I'm like, who does that? Who plays with your emotions like that? I'm thinking about going there, and then they come in there and put you in a room where you still wait on the doctor. 3 levels of waiting at a doctor's office. Waiting is that time we get antsy, and a few places have really mastered the art of waiting for the people. Chick-fil-A has done a really, really good job.
Yes.
I love Chick-fil-A for that very reason. There can be cars wrapped around, and you're still getting in and out pretty quick because they have mastered the art. They know people hate waiting, so they got people out there taking your orders in the rain and the wind. I guarantee you with today's weather, they're still out there taking your order because they know people value that time. They hate waiting. And guess what? When COVID happened and when restaurants were shutting down, they were excelling because they mastered the art. And that's what people do. Cracker Barrel's pretty good. Cracker Barrel's genius if you think about it. You're going to have to wait there for a few minutes to get your table, so they made a retail store where you're going to spend some extra money. You're going to wait, so we got rocking chairs for you to sit in. And if you like that rocking chair for $129, you can have it. We got checkers you can play, and if you like those checkers for $29.99, you can have them. They got the little peg game, you know what I'm talking about? For $9.99, you can have that. And they've got stuff for everybody, so while you're waiting, you're in there, you forget you're waiting. And you forget you're waiting and you're mad, and you buy stuff. You spend more money. They have mastered it because they know how much we hate waiting. I've been to the Atlanta airport, one of the busiest airports in the entire country, and in the lines to go to TSA check, they got a guy over there playing a violin. No, I'm not kidding. They've got a professional violinist sitting over there playing the violin. Me and Stephanie experienced that. Why do they have it over there? Because when there's a violin player, you're more at ease, you're calm, and you're just listening to the music as he's playing. Because they understand the importance or how much we do not like waiting. How many of us have found ourselves waiting on a promise from God? You can grab a hold of that promise. You know what it is that God has you already see the vision. One thing we did Wednesday night, which was really, I loved, I didn't necessarily intend to do this, but it worked out perfect when we were at the church property. We all stood at the front of the road looking at where the church was going to sit. And I asked several people to volunteer, and several people, what do you see when you look over there? And everybody had a different vision, but everything was in perfect harmony with each other, even though it was a different vision, but everything was in harmony. But everybody had a vision of the promise that God has for us. But right now we just have a grass field. Some of us, we know that God has promised us something, But we have to wait for it, and that's tough sometimes. Like, God, why don't you just go ahead and do it? And a lot of times we just go ahead and step over God's waiting time, and we just try to take matters into our own hands. How many of us have done something without the patience that it requires, and you've made some bad mistakes? You bought a car that you shouldn't have bought. You paid too much. You bought a house, a property that was a money pit. You've done some things. You've went places. You've not planned. You've not waited on the clearance, all clear from God, and you've done some things you shouldn't have done. You've already been given the promise. You know what's going to happen, and you trust the Lord, but you've been in the waiting room for what feels like forever. That's me. Over my life, I've made plans according to my will several times. Listen to what I just said there, my will. Plans according to my will. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with making plans according to your will and then asking God, hey, do these line up with your will? There's nothing wrong with that. But sometimes they don't line up, and I wrote a few of mine down. I said I want to graduate college by this time. Didn't work. I graduated college in that time, but my degree did not get me the job I wanted, so I had to go back to school for some more time. I said I want to be married by a certain time. And my wife, well, we had that discussion on the way here, and she's still a little sore about that one, apparently. I said she had an idea when she wanted to be married, and I'm like, yeah, that was perfect. I would love to be married by then. But then when the time got closer and closer, I'm like, I don't even have money to buy a ring. And even if I could buy a ring, I don't have money to buy a house. And if I could buy a house, I don't have money to put food in that house. All right? So the Lord just, in the help of my father, gently said, you know what? Now's not quite the time for that. So if it would have been up to me and her, we would have been married a few years earlier, but the Lord says this is not the time. Who knows what would have happened if me and her would have been married then? We might not be married now. Very well possible. You know what I'm talking about. You know, whenever you have problems and arguments and fights with your spouse, it's good when you have a good background with them and got a little bit of money in the bank, you know what I'm saying? It's one thing to argue, but one thing to argue when you're broke and you got a dollar. That adds a whole new level to it. And then, arguing broke and in your parents' house, that just takes it to another level. You know what I'm saying? And then you got to whisper because you're in your bedroom, you know, we've been there. We've been there. You know, one time my dad was under the house. He got the shop down there, and me and Stephanie were arguing, and my dad started beating on the floor down there. The air's in there. I'm like, he knows what we're going through right now. But that is why we wait, because now when me and my wife argue, we know that in the night we're still going to go to bed in the same house. We know that we're going to get up and go to church together. We know all these things. We know that we may not be rich, but we can pay for my kids to get whatever they need to get done. And that's why you wait on the Lord. I wanted to have some land. That is one of my dreams, more than a vehicle, more than anything. I wanted to have some land, and there was a couple times I tried to get some, but it didn't work out, and the doors was closed in front of me. And if I would have made it happen, I would have paid too much for it. Then the Lord opened the door that he said, this is what I want you to have. There was a time where we wanted to have kids by a certain age, and trust me on that one, the Lord made it clear He had different plans than I had. He couldn't have been more clear. And then there's different times, and I had plans to travel to all 50 states. And it was going good until Lucy came along. And then I go to about Savannah, and that's about as far as I go. But all these times, hindsight is 20/20. Who's ever heard that saying? All these times I look back at those goals that I had and said, Lord, you were so right all along. You were so perfect. If I would have had kids any earlier than that, it would have been a kid raising a kid. But you have perfected me during that time. I'm not perfect, but you've perfected this area of me. You made me the father that you wanted me to be during that time of waiting. You gave me the land that, honestly, I was trying to buy 10 acres, and the Lord said, you ain't getting it. The door shut in front of me. Now I got 200. That's what the Lord does for you. He said, you just wait on me. I was trying to pay too much for 10 acres. He shut the door. Another door cracked open. He shut that one. I mean, they were getting shut in my face, and I was tired of waiting. I said, I went and borrowed money from everybody I could. I borrowed money from my dad, my brother, the bank, everybody, and I was going to buy 10 acres, and the door shut in my face. Next thing I know, the banker calls me and says, you're getting all of it. That's what the Lord does for you. Hindsight is 20/20. In every one of those scenarios, He was waiting for me He wanted me to wait a little bit, to mature a little bit. He didn't want me to answer my own requests. He waited till I was on the right path in college. He waited till the right land was available. He waited till I was no longer a kid for me to have kids. That's tough for us to understand sometimes, because we think we're ready for the blessings God's going to pour out for us. And he says, oh, I got the blessings for you, you're just not ready for them yet. I got them for you, you're just not quite ready for them yet. Today's message is not about why we should wait. I've actually spoke that message before. Today's message is what we do while we're waiting. Stephanie phrased it this morning, you don't wait in the cave. Who's ever had something happen to you and you just want to get away from the world for a little bit? There's nothing wrong with that. You have something happen, you don't want to see anybody. You don't want to talk to anybody. You don't want to put on a face of joy. You don't want to do those things. You went through a tragedy, you went through those things. And there are times, so there's seasons where you go to the cave. But I'm going to tell you, if you stay in that cave, you're going to live in that cave. And then you're going to die in that cave, and it's going to be your tomb. There comes a time where we have to step out and say, God, you haven't given me what you have promised, but I'm not going to wait on you in this cave. I'm going to step out. I'm going to claim some things. I'm going to perfect myself. I'm going to prepare myself for the blessings that you have for me. I'm going to prepare myself even better so you can give me even more of a blessing than what I was expecting. And that's what he does for us. What are some of the things you like to do when you're waiting? Some of us, if I stopped speaking for 3 minutes, you'd have your phone out scrolling. We'd be scrolling. Some of us would play games, Candy Crush. How many of y'all like games and useless nonsense to pass time? Some of us, we'd be reading. Some people like to read. If you like to read and don't get forced to, I'm just me and you are not the same kind of person. We're just not the same. If you like to read, but that is a pastime. I've got students that like to read. I've got, reading is a good thing. We do those things to pass the time. Car rides. Think about things you do on car rides. You sing songs. You listen to music. You listen to podcasts if you're today's generation. Whatever it may be. Justin, listen to podcasts?
Yes.
I figured you did. We do things to pass the time. We do those things while we're waiting. My one, and me and Buck agree on this one, is a good nap. A nap is a good way to pass the time. But we do those things to wait to pass the time. But during the time we're waiting on the promise from God, we should be perfecting our craft. We should be perfecting our faith. We should be preparing ourselves to receive the blessing. God says, I'm not going to pour out new wine in old wineskins. So while I'm waiting on that new wine, I need to be building myself a new wineskin to prepare for it. When I want a house, I should be building a foundation. One thing my dad does, and now I can appreciate it, when he wants to build something, way before he's got the money, he's out there cutting the grass where it's going to be. And he will sit back and just look at it. He'll sit there in a golf cart with his feet propped up, looking at a blank piece of grass. And I'm like, what are you doing? And he's visioned the whole entire thing out right in front of himself. That's what you call waiting, preparing yourself. He says, whenever the money does come, the foundation's already there. We have that property over there, and I was over there. We've got it prepared. So when the time comes, we are prepared for it. We don't just sit idly by and like, all right, we need to build a building. Where can we get land at? Imagine if we had waited till 2023 to buy some land. Imagine that for a second. We wouldn't be building a church in Bryan County. We'd be over the other side of Cobbtown. I saw places before. We'd be over there. Imagine if we would have waited. Say, Lord, whenever the time comes, we'll build land, we'll get land, we'll do all this stuff. No, the Lord has been preparing. He's been preparing on the inside. We bought land, but He's been doing more things. He's been preparing teachers. He's been preparing things. He's been putting people in the right place. And we have a new baby in church. Everybody look in the back right there. Look at Brandon. This is the first time they're bringing their new baby. Let's give them a round of applause. They have a brand new baby. That's preparing. Yeah. The Lord said, I'm preparing. You're not just waiting idly by. I'm preparing. I am building up the teachers in this little building. I am building up the preachers in this little building, the musicians in this little building. So when that church does get built, we're just going to transition flawlessly, seamlessly from one place to the next. We're not going to have to worry about, what does this do and where does this go and who's going to go here and who's going to go there and who's going to keep the nursery and who's going to teach the class. We're just going to transition from one place to the next because we didn't sit idly by. Psalms 27, Wait for the Lord, be strong, and let your heart take courage. Yes, wait for the Lord. It says wait for the Lord twice in that one verse. And while you're waiting, it says, let your heart take courage. During these times, we have to gain some courage sometimes. We have to strengthen ourselves. We have to read the Word. We have to surround ourselves with people that are going to encourage us. And it says, wait for the Lord. Be strong, let your heart take courage. Yes, wait for the Lord. Almost like they knew we were going to question Is that what you really want us to do? And he says, yes, wait for the Lord. Waiting is a time to gain strength, surround yourself with support, gain trust in the Lord, perfect your faith, not just sit at a bus stop, or as my wife phrased it this morning, don't sit in a cave. I like her example a little better than mine. The waiting prepares us for what God has for us. Sometimes what God has for us is not exactly what we asked for. Sometimes it's much better. And that waiting perfects us for what he has for us. In Genesis chapter 37, we see Joseph. And Joseph had a dream of being a ruler over his brothers. Y'all remember that? He had a dream? And his brothers were not too fond of that. His brothers were not too fond of what that dream meant. But Joseph had a dream that he was going to be a ruler over his brothers. And he could just sit back idly and say, hey, I'm just going to sit back and I'm going to be a ruler. But his brothers sold him. They weren't very happy about that. And then Joseph later on was falsely imprisoned. But instead of just waiting out his sentence, he's in prison. Instead of Joseph waiting out his prison waiting in prison until his sentence or judgment day, he continued to pray. He grew spiritually stronger. And I wrote, he also started basically a prison ministry. In that time of down and outs, he said, I'm not just going to sit here and wait for my prison sentence to be over. He started interpreting dreams. He started a prison ministry. In the prison, he found favor. I'm going to tell you something. The Lord can make you find favor no matter where you're at. You can be in the slums, in a prison, and he found favor. So while he was waiting, he didn't get down and out on himself. And keep in mind, he was falsely in prison for something he did not do. He perfected his craft. He perfected his faith. And then, because he was able to interpret dreams, and I encourage you to go back and read the story, because of his ability that the Lord had given him to interpret dreams, he was catapulted from the prison to one of the top people in the country. And yes, his brothers were under him. The dream came true, but I'm sure Joseph would have probably liked to have cut some steps out along the way. I'm sure he would have probably liked to have his coat of many colors that his father gave him and went straight from there to being one of the highest guys in command. But there was a waiting process. And during that waiting process, he perfected his craft. He was able to interpret those dreams. The lame man lay on a mat 38 years. I'm not even 38 years old, so that would be my entire life spent on a mat. The woman with the issue of blood had it for 12 years. Imagine a sickness, a disease, an illness, something that plagued you for 12 years. During that time, Jesus was perfecting their faith. She probably didn't have quite perfect faith for many of those 12 years. Maybe 11 years and 364 days, she didn't have quite perfect faith. But we know the woman exercised perfect faith at the 12-year mark. And we're not sure if it's exactly 12 years. But at the 12-year mark, she exercised perfect faith. She crawled across the street, a busy street, laid down, touched the hem of his garment. And he goes, then, right there, that is when your faith was perfected. And she was healed from the issue of blood. Abraham was about 75 years old when God promised him descendants as numerous as the stars. Imagine being 75 years old and God saying, you don't have any kids yet, but you're going to, and they're going to be your descendants are going to be as numerous as the stars. Look here, if God told me right now at 37 I was having another kid, I'd panic a little bit. All right, I got 2 of them, and that's one for each hand right now. I think Justin Machine will just roll with the punches and take it off. They just go with it. But at 75 years old, he'd already waited quite a lifetime. That is about the average lifespan of an adult in 2023, an adult male. But 75 years when God promised him descendants as numerous as the stars. So this wasn't a promise that went back even way further. It happened at 75 years. But at age 86, if you do the math, it's about 11 years. Abraham got a little tired of waiting, didn't he? He got a little tired of waiting. That's 11 years. I mean, he had a pretty good run. Some of us, we can't wait for the microwave to stop before we take our Hot Pocket out. If you look at my microwave, there's always 3 seconds left on the clock because I can't ever stop. I can't ever wait till it gets to the end. Listen, every time I eat a hot and ready pizza from Little Caesars, I burn the top of my mouth. Every time. And you can ask my wife, and it is, whenever they hand me that hot and ready pizza out the window, it's hot and I'm ready for that thing, man. I put it in my lap and I'm like, this thing is too hot to eat. It is. First of all, I said, here, baby, take it. And I hand it to her, and I hand it to her gently like a newborn baby. I hand it to her. And as she's there, I said, just let me look at it. I said, that's what I do. I said, just let me look at it. She'll open it up, and you can still see the cheese bubbling. And she's like, it's too hot. I said, give it to me anyways. And she'll give me that slice of pizza, and I'll eat it, and that cheese will weld itself to the top of my mouth. And then you cannot get it down, you can't get it out, you can't do nothing. And it melts the skin off your mouth. And you've been there before. Because we don't like waiting. And I use that as an example, but that is the truth. We don't like waiting. 75 years. I already waited 5 minutes for a hot and ready pizza. You know why Little Caesars is in business? Because we don't like to wait. Hot and ready. And he said 75 years. And then 10 years later, he took matters into his own hands, kind of like what I did. And it backfired. He added the son Ishmael with his wife's slave, and the Lord was not pleased with that. And because of that, he waited till he was 99, 14 more years before he finally made his wife pregnant. They were pregnant, where they had a child, 100 years old. 100 years old. But I want to tell you something. Even at 100 years old, God can fulfill your promise.
That's right.
If God promised it, he can do it.
That's right.
If God gave you those promises, don't take matters into your own hand. Wait on him. What was he doing? He was perfecting Abraham's faith. Why? Because he knew that he was going to ask Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. And if he would have gave him Isaac a year before, he probably wouldn't have done it. But when he waited till 100 years, he said, Abraham, your faith is perfect. When I ask something of you, you're going to do it. That's why he waits some time before he grants our desires, our wishes, because he says, if I give it to you any sooner, you're going to take some of the credit for it. And if I give it to you any sooner, I can't trust you. And any sooner, you may not be faithful when I ask you to step up later on. 14 more years till Abraham was born. 100 years old, but the Lord keeps his promises. Keeps his promises. God was perfecting his faith, and trusted him during this time. Don't sit back. Perfect your craft. Whatever it is that you're going through, perfect your craft during this time. Say, God, I want a house. Well, read some Bible verses about building. Read some things about foundation. Start going out there and cutting the grass. One thing you don't realize is when I told you my dad would go out there and would look at something before he built it, he wasn't just looking at it. He was praying over it. He's praying over it. And he said, Lord, and there's been times, let me tell you the truth, there's been times where he cut slots and looked at it and said, this is where I'm going to build my house, and his house didn't end up there. He had this place at the top of the hill that he always wanted to build a house. And he would keep it cut, and he would look at it, and he would pray over it, but his house is not there anymore. His house is somewhere else. And it's even better than the house he had planned up there. Even more perfect. It's got more history. It's got more sentimental value to him. He loves it. That if he would have built a house up there, he would not have been happy. And the Lord says, I got better plans for you. You just trust me. You just keep praying to me. You keep praying, and let's let our wheels line up. There was a young man named David. You know the story here. We all know the story of David. David was anointed by King Samuel that he was going to be king. Let me rephrase that. He was anointed to be king by Samuel, and it took, from the time Samuel anointed him as king, 25 years. From the time he was anointed to the time he took the throne. 25 years. How many of us would have forgotten the promise at that long? Lord, you told me I was going to be king, but that was many, many years ago. I was looking at that picture of me in that room in there, and I look a lot different than I did back then. Some of us are like, God, you promised a young boy, now I'm an older man. The Lord will promise, he'll keep his promise. So 25 years after Samuel anointed David is when he took throne. But what was David doing during those 25 years? If you were David and the Lord or Samuel anointed you and you knew that you were going to become king, you might have took 25 years and just relaxed and said, you know what? I don't really need to get an education. I don't really need to do much because I got big things coming. If you knew you were going to win the lottery, you might not go to work tomorrow. But during those 25 years, David perfected his craft. He was a shepherd. That prophecy could have made him arrogant, could have made him sorry. What did he do for those 25 years? He refined his prayer. Waiting is a time to refine our prayer life, guys. Some of us, we don't have much of a prayer life. Some of us, it's not as perfect as it could be. He refined his worship. He was a musician. He refined his skill as a shepherd. His fearlessness during this time. He killed a bear and a lion. That's pretty impressive. During this time. And then, we know the story of David and Goliath. We all know that David encountered this giant Philistine and killed him. But one of the things that, when you read more than just a story, you go back a few chapters, you go forward a few chapters, it's really interesting, is that his father Jesse, David wasn't with the Israelites when they were waiting out Goliath. Goliath would come out every morning, and he would say, "Send me your best, I'll kill him." You know, he was every morning. So the Israelite army was waiting out Goliath, and they were praying, saying, "Lord, give us a solution. Give us a way of getting rid of this giant Philistine, this six-fingered, six-toed man, this giant, stood 9 feet tall. Give us this fearless warrior. He's got descendants. He is hurting us. He is killing us. Give us something." So the Israelite army was waiting, and David was waiting. David was waiting to be king, and the Israelite army was out waiting or trying to wait Goliath. But sometimes in our waiting, listen to this closely. This is tough, because sometimes when we're in our waiting, we can't see anybody's problem but ourselves. Listen to this for just a second. Sometimes we think what we're going through is so big and bad, we lose sympathy and empathy for other people. But in your waiting, you could be the answer to somebody else's waiting. Listen to that closely. During your waiting time, you could be the answer to somebody else's prayer in their waiting time. Use what you have. So here's David, and David didn't even really know about Goliath at this point. And Jesse said, "Go send word to your brothers and go find them in camp and send a message." So here you go. You got David pulling up to camp, and he's finding his brothers, and there's King Saul. And there, every morning, Goliath would come out and say, "Send me your best leader." So here's David out there, and here's Goliath come up. And I really think that this is David's first encounter with Goliath at this point. And he sits there and goes, "Hold up, who is that? Who's that out there talking that trash right now? Who is that out there talking trash saying he'll kill anybody you send out there?" I truly believe this was David's first encounter with ever even hearing of this person, like hearing. And he said, "Who is this person that is making y'all be in fear? Who is this person that is making you wait? Who is this person that is causing all these problems?" And they said, "That is Goliath." And I can imagine David stepped around the corner and looks at this giant of a man out there in the middle of this battlefield. And he's like, "Let's do this. Let's take care of it." He didn't have to be encouraged to do that. He didn't have to build up his strength. The Lord had been perfecting him for that moment, such as that right there. I bet he looked at him and said, "That's who y'all are waiting on?" So sometimes your problems to somebody else may not be that big of a deal, and they can step in. So use what you've been through. Maybe you've lost a loved one. Maybe you've been through something before, and you may be the answer to someone else's prayer. So David steps up and says, "All right, I got this guy." He goes over and grabs 5 stones, not because he was afraid of missing, because he's going to kill anyone who came out after him. That's the fearlessness that the Lord was perfecting in David while he was waiting on being the king. Some of us, if that would have been us as David, we'd been sitting down, eating little snacks and saying, "I'm going to be king one day. I don't have to do this."
Yeah.
You don't just sit back and wait. You perfect your skill. David was a shepherd, so he perfected the art of the sling. Use your skill to help others during that waiting. Use your waiting to be the answer to someone else's waiting. Pray, worship, encourage, be of good mind, stay positive. Don't seek revenge. That's something right there. Don't seek revenge. Some of us, we can't. The human nature in us wants to seek justice. We want to seek revenge. We want to seek, why this happened. I got to find an answer to this. Sometimes we have to wait. Do you know that prophecies of the birth of Jesus, prophecies of a Savior goes back all the way to Genesis? There was prophecies of Jesus' birth that go back to Genesis. Thousands of years they knew of the birth of Jesus to come. They knew there was going to be a Savior to come. In Genesis chapter 3, it says, I will put enmity. This is God talking to the serpent after Eve and Adam taking the fruit. He said, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. Her seed, her offspring, generations to come. He will bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. So that is one of the first foretellings of Jesus coming. And it was there was 14 generations just from Abraham to David. 14 generations. So they knew it was coming, but they had to wait on the Lord. Thousands of years. Numerous prophecies of Jesus' birth, but they had to wait for it. And I want to wrap up with a couple more scriptures. Paul and Silas, one of my favorite stories. We're going to be in Acts chapter 15, verse 22. So if you have a Bible, we're going to read right there for just a minute. Paul is going around preaching the gospel. And at this point, there is this, he's in town, and there's this young girl who has a demon possessed. She has the ability to read the future. She's a fortune teller. She's a Miss Cleo. Y'all remember Miss Cleo, these commercials that come on TV? So that was what she did, and her owners, she was a slave girl, her owners made a lot of money off of her ability to do that. People would pay them money for that young lady to read their future, to give them a fortune. And this one particular girl was just harassing Paul and Silas as they were walking around. She was just harassing him. And finally, he got fed up with it. And Paul cast the demon out of her. He cast the demon out of her, and she lost her ability to be a fortune teller. And guess what? Those people that owned her, they lost their ability to make money. They lost that cash cow, that money coming in. So they were not happy about it. So they got Paul and Silas put in jail for that very reason. Now, keep in mind that Paul is a Hebrew. He's by birth, but he's a Roman citizen. And he had rights, and they broke his rights by putting him in a Roman jail. They couldn't do that to him, but they did anyways, because they just assumed that he was a Hebrew, not a Roman citizen, because he's preaching the gospel, casting the demon out. But they put him in jail. Now, I did some research on these jails that they put him in. It's underground, and they have 2 layers to this, and it is dark. They have the inner dungeon and the outer dungeon. I guess they're more high-profile criminals would go in the inner dungeon, and it is pitch black. It is dark. There were individual cells that they would put you in. They'd put you in this big old group, and they would chain you to each other. You didn't get bathroom breaks. You just used it where you were at. You didn't get food. You didn't get water unless people were charitable and would bring it to you. The guards did not provide you with that. They were in this dungeon, mind you, for a crime they did not do, in this deep, darkest dungeon, and they had a guard that would come in and watch over them. Now, that's a pretty bad place. The Romans were good at torture. And here's another thing. Romans did not give prison time. Prison was not a punishment. Prison was a holding place until you got your sentence, and either you walked away alive or you walked away dead. Okay? So there wasn't, you committed a crime, you're going to get 10 years in prison. No, that's not how it worked. The Romans were a little bit more ruthless than that. So in verse 22 of chapter 15, we'll pick up, just go back just a little bit. A mob quickly formed around Paul and Silas, and the city officials ordered them stripped, beaten with wooden rods. Now keep in mind, they just cast the demon out of the woman, or the girl, and the owners of the girl brought them up to the city officials, and they were unpleased. So they were stripped, beaten with wooden rods. They were severely beaten, and then they were thrown into prison. The jailer was ordered to make sure they didn't escape, so the jailer put them in the inner dungeon and clamped their feet in the stocks. Now, at that point, your hands and your feet are buckled down. You're in prison waiting your sentence. You can walk up, you can leave this place upright or on your back. You can be either alive or dead. And while they were there, they didn't just ride the clock out. They didn't just wait. They didn't just wait for their sentence to come. Around midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God. What does that tell me? During my times of trial, during my times of waiting on the Lord, pray and sing hymns to God. Now, I don't have any reason to believe that Paul was a great singer. I don't believe that Paul was necessarily going to win America's Got Talent or anything like that. I believe that Paul didn't care what people thought of his singing. I believe that during this time while he was waiting, Paul said, I'm going to pray and I'm going to sing. It says, around midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the other prisoners were listening. You got to perfect it. Get out of your cave. Get out of your cave. Let some other people know what you're going through. Say, yeah, I am going through this right now, but I'm going to praise, I'm going to sing. You can listen to me, and my victory is going to be not just for me, it's going to be for you as well. I want to be the answer to yours as well, because I'm going to pray, I'm going to sing. You can sit back in a cave. Right then, basically, Paul and Silas were in the cave. And they didn't just say, I'm going to ride this out in the cave. They didn't try to shimmy over to the corner where it was dark and say, I hope nobody sees me. Sometimes we do that, don't we? We come to church and we try to blend in a little bit. We say, I want to go to church, but I don't really want an encounter. I want to just kind of blend in. I have students that do that all the time. When I go ask them questions, they try to slouch down in the chair and don't be seen. And that's what they could have done, but they said, no, people are listening to me. People are knowing what I'm going through. And they started to sing and they started to praise. Suddenly there was a massive earthquake and the prison was shaken to its foundations. But that's good. But listen a little bit further. All the doors immediately flew open and the chains, now listen to this, of every prisoner. Not Paul and Silas' chains, the chains of every prisoner. While you're waiting, you don't know the impact that your perfection, that you're working will have on not just yourself, but those around you. Sometimes you need a breakthrough, not just for yourself, but all the other ones around you. There's no telling how long those other prisoners have been in there. Some of them may have been at death's door. Some of them may have not eaten in days. And because of their praise, because of their breaking the chains, they were all set free. Now, I know the next part. I always do the next part. But then when you read, I'm going to tell you something. You got to start reading. Even some of the stories that you already know, you need to read and say, God, show me something new. The jailer woke up, verse 27, and the prison doors wide open. He assumed the prisoners had escaped, so he drew the sword to kill himself. But Paul shouted, stop, don't kill yourself. We are all here. If the prisoners had escaped, the soldier, the guard, would have faced a torturous death. He's a Roman. He knows what the Romans are capable of doing. He said, it is a better option for me to kill myself than to go through what I'm about to go through if they catch me with these prisoners gone. But guess what Paul and Silas did? They didn't leave. They waited. The jailer called for the lights, ran to the dungeon, and fell down, trembling before Paul and Silas. Then he broke them out and asked, Sirs, what must I do to be saved? If Paul and Silas wouldn't have waited, that man would have never been saved. Sometimes we have to wait. Sometimes we have to wait. Now, I thought this was how the story ended. You know, hey, prison walls fell, the chains, so they just moseyed on out of there. But it goes a little bit further than that. Verse 35. The next morning, the city officials, the same ones that put Paul and Silas in the jail, said to the jailer, let these men go. So that tells me they didn't leave. Even though there was no chains on them, they still waited because God had more to do. God still had plenty to do. He said, let these men go. So the jailer told Paul, the city officials said that you and Silas are free to leave. Go in peace. Well, Paul was like, I've been free to leave since midnight. You don't decide if I'm free to leave. My God decided if I was free to leave.
Amen.
He said, I've been free since midnight, but I'm still here. I'm still waiting because the Lord has more to do. Sometimes when you think that the Lord's done, you got to wait just a little bit longer. You got to hold on just a little bit longer. But Paul replied, they have publicly beaten us without a trial, and that puts us in prison. And we are Roman citizens. So now they want us to leave secretly, certainly not. Let them come release us. He goes, they publicly put me in here. They're going to publicly pull me out. The Lord, everybody's going to see what the Lord is capable of doing. I'm going to tell you something. When you wait, the Lord's going to receive the victory.
Yeah, he does.
That's right.
When the police reported this, the city officials were alarmed and learned to learn that Paul and Silas were Roman citizens, so they came out and apologized to them. The Bible goes on to tell you that numerous Romans were converted because of Paul. The enemies, There was a time when Paul was on house arrest. You know what house arrest is. You're arrested, but you're not really arrested. You're in your house. For 2 years, they chained a guard to him. Chained a guard to him. Everywhere he went for 2 years, really not everywhere he went because he wasn't allowed to leave his house, but within the confines, every moment he had a guard chained to him. And the guards would constantly replace themselves. About every 3 hours, they would bring in a new guard. And during that time, Paul was able to minister, but people had to come to him, and he had this guard chained to him. While he was waiting, he was chained to something. While he was waiting, that guard was tortured to him. While he was waiting, but here's what happened. Every guard that spent a couple hours with him was ministered and changed by Paul. In your waiting, you're having an impact on those around you. The ones that were there to kill you, the ones that were there to bring you down, just a couple of hours at a time. And then the guards would leave there and go somewhere else, and guess what? They would take the teachings and the word that Paul gave to them. So sometimes in your waiting, you're more effective than any other time. Sometimes it's in your waiting where the miracles happen, where the change happens. And right now, we may be waiting, but we're not sitting idly by.